because I was asked to. So what we're going to do this morning, instead of going over the consumer presentation, is we're going to look at some of the nuances of this policy and some of the questions that are asked frequently, things that probably we have not ever covered before. And so I call this questions you forgot to ask about critical care in GTL. So before I get into the product itself, there's a couple of other questions I think we can address that would be valuable and worthy of addressing. And the first one is, and you can see on my screen, what are the top 3 out-of-pocket expenses people have when they have health insurance? When they have a problem with their health, what are the out-of-pocket expenses that they experience? And you can see here, here's the top ones. On the left, these are the medical experiences, and it is co-payments, and they can be rather large if you're continually having medical problems and treatment, prescriptions, and out-of-network doctor visits. Then you have those non-medical expenses, which include travel. If you have to go to the clinic up in Washington and you have a major problem that requires that kind of specialist, then travel could be very expensive. Home and auto modifications and home maintenance are problems that result from not being able to do things that you ordinarily do when you have a critical illness. Now, sometimes I get the question, but I usually get it from agents. I don't usually get it from clients. But from agents, they'll say, well, what's the company's rating? And then I'll tell them, well, if you're talking about AM Best, the rating is B+. And then for those of us who are familiar that Genworth is an A-rated company, and some other companies have ratings that could have been an A, the question then is, well, the company's B+ rated, should I be concerned? And I think that's a legitimate question for us, but keep in mind that I've sold 15 or so of these policies online and in person, actually more than that, and I've yet to have a client ask me about the company. Isn't that rather strange? Maybe it's because they know that this is all they can get, maybe. Maybe it's because I don't bring it up. Maybe it's because I don't make it an issue. Occasionally they ask me when I'm done, oh, by the way, what's the name of this company? Oh, well, it's GTL. And that's the initials for Guaranteed Trust Life, and they're a privately owned mutual company up in Indiana. Been around since 1936, and that usually suffices. But for us long-term care specialists who often started a presentation by talking about the company, we get concerned about ratings, and I think it's legitimate for us to feel good about the company. So let's talk about GTL and their financial experience. GTL's on a roll right now. They've been experiencing record sales for the last 4 years in a row. They're a mutual company, which means they aren't concerned about stock price like some stock companies are, and they make decisions sometimes in a different way than companies that are immediately concerned about their stock. So it's a conservative company. Then they've been in business since 1936, so it's a well-established company. The fact that it's private does make it different, and they're not influenced by Wall Street and the perception of Wall Street. Now, about ratings, you know there's S&P, there's Weiss. There's one company that rates insurance companies, and they don't get money from the insurance company. All the rest do. AM Best does not provide ratings if the insurance company does not pay for those ratings. Weiss Rating Services is one of the toughest of all the rating systems, and they don't get money, don't collect money from the insurance companies, and therefore they're not promoted by the insurance companies either because they are totally independent. And it might interest you to know that GTL has a B rating in Weiss. Weiss is a tough rating system. It might surprise you that Genworth, for example, does not have a B rating by Weiss. So that's a really good rating. The fact that they have a good rating in Weiss, that's in the top 20% of the companies they rate, by the way. The fact is that GTL's overall investment, they're not in stock and bonds, they're in bonds and cash mostly right now. And this points to why GTL's been around for 75 years. They're really pretty conservative. That's not all. I'm going to share one more thing with you about the company, and then I'm going to move on to some other issues that are probably more interesting to you. What are some financial measurements that can help me be comfortable with my clients and with GTL? Okay, if we were to take GTL's market value of all of their assets and sell them at market value, and then take the money that we collected and then pay all the debt off, what would be left? Well, with Guaranteed Trust Life, that ratio would be 17 cents. That's a 1.17 ratio. For every dollar of expenses, they have $1.17 of assets. So if we use that as and compare it with other companies, it might make you feel pretty good. Aflac, everybody's heard of Aflac. If they did that, they'd be left with 7 cents. If Bankers Life and Casualty did that, they'd be left with 6 cents. A Guardian Life out of New York, 15 cents. A-plus rated John Hancock would be left with 2 cents. And Metropolitan Life Insurance would be left with 4 cents. So, and Northwestern, 1.09. So what you see there is that that's a really good ratio when you compare it to other companies. I don't know what Genworth's is. My bet is it won't be 1.17. So the point is the company has a good asset to liability ratio. The average of the 25 leading accident and health companies is 1.07 compared to Guaranteed Trust Life asset to liability ratio of 1.17. So should make you feel pretty good about the company. Again, they've been around a pretty long time. I don't have it come up because it's not an issue with me. I'm comfortable with it, and so it just doesn't come up. What I found is that when we get objections from customers, oftentimes, almost all the time, somehow they're created with our body language, with our facial expressions, with our voice inflection. I can give you example after example where I've been with agents field training, and I've done a lot of that in my life, and I can share with you how that agent created an objection. Sometimes they were unable to overcome it. I don't believe in creating objections. I like to have objection-less interviews where I don't, whoever said we need to get all the objections out, I don't know what they were talking about because I could spend all day getting all the objections out. I'd just rather not have any. But that's another story for another day when I'm talking about objection-less interviews. So any questions about the company, or is this pretty sufficient and useful for you? I'll take your silence as a meaning that that is. So now, on the application, there's a place for a spouse. Is the spouse considered a dependent on the application? And you could draw that conclusion by looking at the application. However, a dependent is not a spouse. It is someone who lives in the house, a child, under age 26. Because we help people who are in their 50s and 60s and 70s and sometimes in their 80s, this is not an issue, and I have not been able or I've even proposed to cover a dependent. That would, again, would be somebody under age 26, and the policy would actually stop for that dependent at when they became 27. If you did run across a circumstance where you would pick up a 20-year-old or a child, the maximum benefit for a dependent is $500 per month. And there's a separate plan choice for dependents. Again, it's not something that we do. Bottom line is a spouse is not a dependent, and the only reason for having two people on an application is to save the $25 annual policy fee for one of them. You could put them on two applications, but then you'd have two different policy fees. So it's useful when you have a husband and wife apply to put them on the same application. There is no spousal discount. Okay, so that's covering spouse as a dependent. They are not. And if you read some of the language in the outline code, you might conclude that. So now here's an issue I hope that all of you have to deal with. How much do I have to submit with an application? Well, we're used to collecting premium. Matter of fact, we're told you have to do that, but most of us have found out you can get around it if you try. But we submit premium, and we're told we should collect the modal premium that the customer chooses. And that is still the case if you're not going to do a draft. So if you collect a premium, the premium that the customer chose, I collect annuals, that's what I do, because that's what I expect, and then they buy it, because that's what I believe they should do, and they will do. But on occasion, or you may even adopt it as a standard operational procedure, you could take an EFT, electronic funds transfer, collect a voided check, and not collect any money with this policy. If you do everything right, you'll get the policy back in about 2 weeks. So it doesn't take long to underwrite it. If you sell an EFT, that is to say they want to have a draft, you can draft monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, and annually. The only way the company will take a monthly, however, is on the automatic draft. The others are just choices. But keep in mind, if you do an annual draft, that customer better make sure they have the money in the bank account next year, because the company will draft that annual premium. That's a good bit different from what we're used to. So my suggestion is, if you collect an EFT, you would be better off not collecting any money. One of the cases where somebody did collect money, he was thinking about, Jack McNeil, a good friend of mine, was thinking about the customer and said, look, you know, you can, we can collect the monthly and then change to an annual. To do that, you need to go ahead and sign the EFT. He was thinking long-term care, and then we'll come back and we'll change it to annual, and you'll never even have the draft. And the customer says, well, I absolutely don't like anybody drafting my account. He said, oh, don't worry about it. The draft won't occur till later. Well, guess what happened? This company drafts the account if you do an EFT when the policy is approved. So 2 weeks later, guess what happened? Boom, the bank account was drafted, and now the customer's paid 2 payments. Well, in this particular case, it caused him a lot of trouble, because they went back and said, I thought you said my account wouldn't be drafted. So I don't think it's a good idea to collect anything with an EFT. Just collect the EFT and a blank voided check. And then the policy, you can tell them, when the policy is issued, they'll take out the proper modal of premium. If it's monthly, they'll take it out monthly. Okay, what if my client wants to increase or decrease benefits at delivery? There's no standard form for that. You would typically call 800 number at Critical Care Underwriting and request that they add an amendment to the issued policy with the increased benefits amount. So it's a matter of calling them. For a decrease in benefits, this is what they say. You got to fax them a letter signed and dated by the policyholder to Policyholder Services. I think they're probably thinking about decreasing benefits down the road, maybe next year or something, and that's when you do that. My understanding and my experience is that you can make some changes before the policy is actually issued and sent out to the policy holder. So you can, and again, you can get this off of their website. This is where this information came from. Now, does a policyholder change from a monthly draft to a direct bill? Can you do that? And yes, you can, but the client has to fax us a request to stop the bank draft. Now, don't do anything else. Once they stop the bank draft, the company will tell them what the premium is and when to pay it and the prorated amount for the month. They'll work it out. The best thing to do is let them handle it after you fax in a request to stop the bank draft. And all that's details you probably are not really all that interested in. So let's talk about stuff you really are, and that's the nuances of the policy. Here's questions that if someone asks you this, you might would scratch your head and say, I don't really know the answer to that question. Let me get that for you. What if you have a sudden death, never filed a claim, and they want to know what in the world caused that, and upon diagnosis in the autopsy, it's discovered that that person had cancer. They never got treatment. They didn't know they had cancer. They find out with an autopsy that they had cancer. Would the policy pay those benefits after death? The answer is, written clearly in the policy, we will consider the covered person to have been eligible for benefits if a covered condition is diagnosed within 30 days of a covered person's death. So the answer is they will, as long as that diagnosis takes place within 30 days of the covered person's death. Now, would they pay them a monthly benefit? No, that's not how the policy works. When you die, the remaining amount of that would have been paid to you is paid in one lump sum to the family. So they'd actually get a lump sum of and let's say they had a 24-month plan, $3,000 a month. They'd get a check for $72,000. Base benefit $3,000 times 24, $72,000. So that's what would happen if they discovered upon the diagnosis after death when they did an autopsy. So that should be an interesting answer for some of you who probably have wondered about that. Now, I've had some of the agents ask me this question: what about skin cancer? Well, that's kind of a general term, but if the skin cancer is squamous cell or basal cell carcinoma, those aren't considered malignant cancers. But a melanoma is, of course. Cancer means, as written in the policy, a malignant tumor which meets the diagnosis criteria established by the American Board of Pathology. It's characterized by uncontrolled growth and spread of malignant cells. Cancer does include leukemia and cancer in situ. And all of you know that the policy does pay a limited time, 3 months, even for cases of cancer in situ, which doesn't develop into major staged cancer very often. It's usually taken care of, and it does not require continuous treatment. All right. Now, what about another nuance? We say this policy pays on diagnosis. Well, that's true. However, when you read the policy, there is one diagnosis that's a little different from all the others, and that is Alzheimer's. As soon as someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, will the company begin paying benefits? I bet you thought they would, and the answer is no, they won't. In the case of Alzheimer's, it's like this company pays like long-term care insurance does. When the diagnosis is first made by a neurologist, licensed neurologist, and when that person has begun to lose judgment, we can get clinical evidence that they should not be left alone. And that's when it would pay, when it would kick in and start paying. And furthermore, some people are diagnosed with Alzheimer's real early when they can still do everything, still function totally, drive a car. I know people like that right now. They have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, but they're still doing fine. They would not be collecting on this policy. Probably wouldn't want to, because you can only collect one time on Alzheimer's anyway. So when one gets to the condition where they need some assistance and help, then the policy would kick in and pay the full benefit period for Alzheimer's. But in this case, remember, Alzheimer's is diagnosis plus inability to function alone safely. All right, all the rest are diagnosis, by the way, pure diagnosis. Will the policy pay claims for the same cancer more than once? Well, remember, Alzheimer's, you can't get diagnosed with it but one time. When you have it, and you don't get it and get well and get better. So Alzheimer's, you can only get paid one time with Alzheimer's. Let me state that another way. You can only get paid one time for Alzheimer's. If you had Alzheimer's and in 5 years and you collected your 24-month benefit period or whatever you have, and then 3 years later you have cancer, then it would pay again, but not for Alzheimer's. It would be paying for cancer. Well, what about if you have cancer and your cancer goes into remission? Will it pay again if that cancer comes back like it occasionally does? Well, if you're really in remission and not taking preventative or maintenance drugs, you could come out of remission and the policy would pay again for the same cancer. So you need to understand, under certain conditions, the policy will pay for cancer, the same cancer, more than once. Of course, it'll pay for a different cancer once the benefits have been restored. Remember, there has to be a period of 12 months between benefit periods. No payments between the benefit periods. That reset period is 12 months. Now, how many times could you, in theory, have a policy restored? Well, an immediate knee-jerk reaction a lot of people have is, well, 3 times. Well, if it was just 3 times, the person would have to go into a nursing home, come out for 12 months, go back into a nursing home, come out for 12 months, and then go back into nursing. Not very likely, and none of these scenarios are really likely. But most people who use this policy are going to be receiving home care. And therefore, they would only be getting, they'd be getting $3,000 a month instead of 6, which means the policy could restore at least 6 times. So here's the bottom line. The policy could restore no less than 3 times and even more than 6. And you say, well, how can it be more than 6? Well, what if they had cancer in situ or heart attack? Those don't pay the full benefit period. Those are 3 months and 2 months. You can see how the number of times a policy could theoretically restore is much more than 6. But it's really easy to imagine that a policy would actually pay more than 1 time, because there's plenty of people who have had strokes and cancer in a 10-year period of time. So remember, the best way to think about how many times a policy can restore is really to think about how much it would pay as a maximum amount. And that is listed on the policy. We know how it's figured, 3 times the maximum amount times the benefit period. It gives you the total that goes at the bottom of the actual policy, saying this is your maximum lifetime benefit. How long, how many times you could restore it, who knows? Depends on your conditions, where you are, but we know that maximum lifetime benefit is the most the policy will pay. And in our case, in most cases, the maximum amount's $472,000. If you choose the maximum benefit, $3,000 base, pay $6,000 in a nursing home, 24 months, I think it comes to $472,000. So that would be at the bottom of the policy as your maximum lifetime benefit. So how many times can the policy be restored? Multiple times. Now, let's go back and talk about Alzheimer's a little bit, because people ask me, what does it cover with dementia? And the answer is, the smart aleck answer is, do you see dementia listed on the coverage page? No. Please forgive my tendency. I actually do that in jest, and I have fun with it. And for me, it makes me learn if somebody does that to me, because I'm going, okay, I won't forget that again. The answer is, no, it doesn't pay for dementia, unless that dementia is what? Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is a type of dementia, and Alzheimer's is organic. You can do a brain drill if you were alive, and people don't do that, but you could, in our autopsy, and see that the real physical cause of Alzheimer's, it shows up. With depression, you're not going to do an autopsy and say, okay, there it is. See that dementia? Dementia is inorganic. While the long-term care policies won't pay for inorganic brain disorders. Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. Now, the question is, so it's pretty important to know how many of the dementia cases are considered Alzheimer's. So let's look at that so we know, and you should be able to share that with the customer. According to the Alzheimer's Association, Alzheimer's disease accounts for 60 to 80% of the cases diagnosed. It's pretty high. So you say, okay, what about when it's not Alzheimer's? Well, this is pretty interesting. Vascular dementia, which occurs after a stroke, is the second most common dementia type. So that means that this policy, since it pays for a stroke, may not pay for dementia per se, but it would pay for the stroke that caused the dementia. So the majority of cases, you can say, in truth, of dementia are Alzheimer's and caused by stroke. And there's lots of other conditions that cause dementia, which include thyroid problems and vitamin deficiency. So the question is a legitimate one. It won't, just because you're mentally incapable doesn't necessarily mean the policy would pay. It does have to be diagnosed as Alzheimer's. By whom? By a neurologist, because they know the difference, supposed to. Now, we've talked about, well, you don't need to, how do they underwrite? Do they need to get medical records? No, not ordinarily. However, I've sold 15 to 20 policies, and I don't know exactly how many, but I have had 3 cases where the company wrote back and said, we can't give this person what they want without medical records. So there are exceptions to the rule. In about 10% of the applications where the applicant is applying for Plan A, the company may require the client, or it could be you. I actually went out and got permission from the client to get their medical records, and I faxed them. I've never done that before in my life, but I did it. It cost me $50, but it worked. So in that case, I wasn't dumb. I was thinking after I did it, what are you doing paying for medical records? Let the client pay for it. And so in my other 2 cases, I did let the client pay for the medical records, and in 2 out of the 3 cases, it worked to get their requested plan design. The last one I did, the customer was wanting Plan C that covers a stroke, and after getting medical records, they determined they would not issue that, and this was my first case of a NTO. He didn't take it out here. He canceled it because he wanted the stroke coverage. But that happens sometimes, and that's not usually what happens with this business, but it does happen. So the client must pay for the records, or someone must pay for the records at their own expense. And what they have done in the case where I didn't do it for them is they go to the doctor, get their medical records, and then fax it to the company. It's amazing that the company will let them do that, but they want to see, why did they take those prescription medications in the past? Some prescription medication caught their attention. So that is the questions you forgot to ask about GTL. I hope this was helpful, and if there are some peculiar questions that you or product questions you'd like to ask, I will take them now. I'm going to actually stop the recording, and so that this won't be very long when we put it up on a website.